Julia Ann Markham is probably a name you have never heard of, yet her story carries the weight of courage and sacrifice that shaped America during one of its darkest times. She was not a general, nor a soldier standing in uniform on the battlefield. She was a young woman born in 1844 in a quiet farming family along Buffalo Creek near Huntsville, Tennessee. Her father was a simple man, a farmer, a law-abiding Christian who believed in freedom and stood firmly with the Union when the Civil War erupted in 1861. Like many families living in the divided state of Tennessee, the Markhams suddenly found themselves in the middle of a violent storm that would test their strength and faith. When the southern states seceded and war broke out, Julia's home county of Scott refused to bow to the Confederacy. Their loyalty to the Union marked them as enemies in their own land. Raiders and rebel soldiers prowled the hills, searching for Union supporters. The Markham family was one of their main targets. Julia's father became a hunted man, forced to hide while his family faced constant threats from those determined to silence their Union loyalty. In this chaos, Julia's life took a turn that would forever separate her story from the countless forgotten names of that era. At only 17 years old, she was thrown into a night of terror where survival seemed impossible. Rebels surrounded their cabin, determined to kill her father and burn the family alive. What happened in that house, the screaming, the fight for life, the unimaginable bravery, would change Julia forever. Her courage in those moments, and the injuries she carried for the rest of her life, made her the only civilian woman to ever be granted a full military pension after the Civil War. And when she passed away at 91, she was honored with a full military funeral, an honor almost unheard of for someone outside the ranks of the army. Yet despite this, her name and her legacy slipped into the shadows of history. Julia Ann Markham's life is not just a personal story of survival. It is a reminder of the countless silent sacrifices made by ordinary people during extraordinary times. She was a young woman who stood against violence, defended her family, and lived with the scars of war until her last breath. Though history books may have left her name behind, her story deserves to be told, remembered, and honored. War reaches her home by 1861. The Civil War had turned Tennessee into a place of suspicion and danger. Although the state officially joined the Confederacy, the eastern region where Julia Ann Markham lived was bitterly divided. In Scott County, nearly everyone, including Julia's father, stood firmly with the Union. That loyalty, however, was not without a heavy price. Confederate soldiers and raiders swept through the countryside, seeking out Union families, destroying property, and punishing anyone who dared defy them. For Julia's family, every knock on the door, every flicker of torchlight in the distance, carried the threat of death. Julia's father became a hunted man because he openly supported the federal cause. He was forced to live in hiding, always watching the ridges and valleys for patrols. The rebels wanted him dead, and they made no secret of it. They stalked the family home, watching night and day, demanding to know where he was. They threatened Julia's mother, her sisters, and her brother, promising to kill them if they did not betray his location. For a family already struggling to survive, the fear was relentless. Then came September 7, 1861, a night that would change everything. At 2 a.m, the sound of boots and bayonets shattered the stillness. 36 armed Confederate soldiers surrounded the Markham cabin, their torches lighting the dark like a funeral fire. The family awoke in terror as the door was broken open. Inside that small home, only one soldier remained with Julia, her mother, and her sisters, while the rest held their torches high outside. The invaders made their purpose clear. They had come to kill Julia's father, and if they could not find him, they would burn the house with everyone inside. Julia, only 17, watched as her mother was choked and threatened. Her sisters were cornered by the soldier's blade. In that moment, the safety of childhood was gone forever. War was no longer a distant conflict between North and South. It had entered their home, their very bedrooms, with steel, fire, and rage. For Julia, there was no choice left. With nothing but axes to defend themselves, the family prepared to fight back. The war had reached her doorstep, and she would have to face it with every ounce of strength she had. The night of attack, the air inside the Markham cabin was thick with smoke from the rebels' torches and the sharp scent of fear. Julia Ann Markham, just 17 years old, knew there was no escape. Her sisters cried out as the Confederate soldier inside the house shoved his bayonet toward them, jabbing and mocking as he choked their mother. The family had only two weapons, a pair of chopping axes. In that desperate moment, Julia and her sister Minerva each grabbed one. It was all they had between life and death. Minerva's courage faltered, and fear forced her to drop her weapon. But Julia refused to back down. She gripped the handle of the axe tight and climbed the stairs, where one of her sisters was being cornered by a soldier who swore he would cut her throat and set the cabin on fire. His threats echoed through the small home, his voice rising over the terrified screams of the Markham women. Julia moved toward him, her heart pounding louder than the chaos around her. As she reached the top of the stairs, the rebel lunged with his bayonet, aiming to strike her down. Julia ducked under the steel and swung her axe with every ounce of strength she had. The blade landed with a sickening thud, splitting his face and chest. The man staggered back, stunned and pleading for her to stop. But Julia kept striking, her determination born of terror and fury. She had become the protector of her family in a single, violent moment. The struggle turned brutal. Somehow, the soldier managed to wrestle his gun back into his hands. He rammed the bayonet into Julia's forehead, the steel bursting into her skull and blinding her in one eye. Blood poured down her face, yet she did not let go. A shot rang out, tearing through her hand and shattering her finger. Julia collapsed, her young body broken, her strength drained. It was then her father rushed in, finally able to reach the house. He fired his weapon and struck the soldier down, ending the savage fight. But Julia lay unconscious, her face torn, her body mangled by wounds that would mark her for the rest of her life. The rebels fled into the night, leaving the family in darkness, shaken but alive. Julia's courage had turned what was meant to be a massacre into a narrow survival. That night etched her name into history, though she would pay for it with lifelong pain. Wounds and survival, Julia Ann Markham's fight on that September night nearly cost her life. When the rebel's bayonet pierced her skull, it destroyed her left eye and left her disfigured forever. The shot that tore through her hand crippled her ability to work. She fell unconscious, and for a time her family thought she would not survive. But Julia's father and neighbors managed to bring her back, tending to her in the dim light as the last of the rebels vanished into the dark woods. For weeks she drifted between pain and recovery. Doctors did what they could, but medical care in the middle of a war was limited. 3 long months passed before she was strong enough to leave her bed. Every day her injuries reminded her of what had happened. The scars on her face, the missing finger, and the constant ache that never went away. She was only a teenager, yet her life was permanently changed. While Julia recovered, her family's struggle only deepened.